Wait, so your wife has beehives?
Yeah, she's like a beekeeper now. So she's got all these
Like on your property, like at your house.
Yeah, she's got like stacks of them. Like she's out collecting honey and stuff.
For honey, okay.
Right? Yeah. So she was really into this. She wanted to get. She's got chickens and all this other stuff.
In Idaho?
I know, right? Crazy.
Welcome to Drunk Real Estate. Grab a drink and enjoy the show.
Hey there, and welcome to episode 47 of Drunk Real Estate. I am Kyle Wilson, Ashley Wilson's husband. And boys, I feel like we've been together for like a couple months now. I really enjoy it. Thanks for coming.
We've had the crew like every day. This is
I know.
great, every time.
How's it going, AJ?
It's going good, man. Living life. Things are going good. I'm back in town. I've been traveling nonstop.
Did you trim your beard?
Nope. Well, I mean, I trim it like 2-3 times a week, but I haven't done like any major changes. I had a barber cut like 3 inches off my beard. So that's what
I'm saying. It looks shorter. That's what I'm saying. It looks shorter.
It was very upsetting.
Your head looks smaller, I think is what he's saying.
Yes, it's because it is 3 inches smaller. It's dramatically.
Or it might be the perspective of Ernie right next to you too, his massive dome.
Ernie's got a big head. So,
You got a red Solo cup for us?
I mixed it up today.
No.
I went with a clear cup.
Clear cup. Oh,
Still found
okay.
Diet Coke though. So.
Diet Coke. Is that what you're drinking over there, Mauricio? A little soda in your
I know you know what's coming. I'm back to doing a little I'm already halfway through this thing. A little pisco again, and a little pisco and ginger ale. Yummy, yummy, yummy. I know I think Kyle feels like I feel like you're a little snobby when I say that. I feel like when you respond to that comment about what I'm drinking, I feel like you get a little privileged and snobby and saying that's not really a real drink. If you're not drinking like straight up
what's
bourbon.
that called again? A ginger piss?
Pisco. No, that's pisco ginger ale. Piscola.
Ginger piss. That comes from AJ, right?
Yeah, and I decided to wear my since I think we're gonna get a little. I don't want to get political. It's not meant to be political, but since we're getting a little political today, I figured I'd bust out my only semi-political shirt today. I don't know if you guys can see it, but yeah, I thought it matched the occasion, and I heard you were wearing the same color, so I figured I'd match.
Yeah, I got the Blockbuster shirt on. I'm supporting AJ's neck of the woods. The final Blockbuster boss is out there somewhere. Jay, how's it going, man?
Going well. I spent the day, you guys can be jealous, I spent the day playing around with the new ChatGPT release for Omni, GPT-4-Omni, which is super cool. If you guys haven't seen, I meant to send it around our WhatsApp chat. I haven't done it yet. But if you haven't seen some of the demos, super, super awesome. Like it has natural language and voice. So
I was reading about it this morning. I was wondering if any of us had a chance. So is it I
It is super cool. I haven't figured out how to play with any of the voice stuff, but I've seen the demos and I played with the new model, the new large language model, and it's super, super good.
Is that rolled out for everyone? Because I mean, I was on it this morning on ChatGPT 4. I didn't see or notice. Is there something
You have
I got to do?
You have to have a paid account.
Well, I do. I had the paid account, but I didn't. Do I have to?
Well, then you should see it.
Yeah. Okay. I feel a little left out.
So can it text my wife back believably yet, or is that still in beta stages?
No, it doesn't speak Canadian.
Ha ha ha. What are you drinking, Jay?
I am going with.
Whoa!
Look at the size of that ball again.
I'm busting out the Knob Creek. Knob Creek Smoked Maple Reserve.
He's going to be done that by episode 100.
That's the goal.
Jay, tomorrow you and I should get together. I need to give you some lessons on how to show your drink to the camera so that people can see it, as opposed to hey, here's what I'm drinking over here. It's the so and so drink. I've been watching too much Gary Vaynerchuk.
I want to see Jay do that again, where he takes the ice cube out of that cup and shows how much is actually left. Look how big that thing is.
Yeah, it's a big ice cube.
Well, I actually so we are in Pennsylvania, and right across the border in Delaware, there's like literally right across the border, because it's like tax-free and liquor's cheap. And so every once in a while you go there and it's like the biggest liquor store in our area and you stock up. So I did one of those stock ups. So actually I have quite a few new bourbons that I'm going to crack through. But right now I have a Still Austin cask strength bourbon. It was recommended to me by a friend. And so I'm going to give it a go. 58% alcohol. So it's got to be good, right?
And for anybody that's watching this on YouTube, take note, Kyle is not wearing a hat. This might be the first episode Kyle hasn't worn a hat in 47 episodes. So you actually get to see his
There might
hair.
have been one other, but yeah, you're right. You're not going to know when I'm drunk now. I got no hat to turn around. You're going to have to rely on Mauricio. Mauricio's got a hat on. We'll wonder when he turns his around.
Do you have a little dandruff going there? A little dandruff up there or no?
No, where are you looking?
Or is that just white hair that I see? I don't know. One of the others.
Nothing against the dandruff though, but I don't have any. All right, should we get into this?
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
Well, we're going to skip, if it's okay with you guys, we're going to skip the economic update this week because we did have PPI came a little hot for last month, which wasn't good news. But CPI isn't coming out till tomorrow instead of us hypothecating on what's going to happen. And yeah, I guess today when this comes out, instead of us guessing and making assumptions, we'll just talk about it next week if you're okay with that. I would rather talk about the Donald. The Donald's been in the news quite a bit for his lawsuits and various things, but we're going to go a different direction here. We're going to talk about a couple of Wall Street Journal articles about Donald Trump. Now, I feel like I have to caveat this a little bit because the Wall Street Journal is typically considered a left-leaning publication.
No, it's not.
No, it's not.
Wall Street Journal?
It is not.
So we are trying to take the base facts from these articles.
Right. He just starts right off with his political commentary. Like right off the bat, he throws in his political commentary, right? This is not supposed to be a political episode.
Maybe compared to your Canadian rags, it's left leaning, but it's.
Well, I just know that some people think that Wall Street Journal, like whenever they talk about Trump, it's like a hit piece. So I just wanted to come out and say that we're going to try and take out the base facts from these articles and do our own analysis and conclusions. So this isn't any commentary against Trump himself or anything. This is more of us taking the facts of what came out of this. So if we take go to our first article, it suggests that there is a document outlining that Trump, if elected, could remove Fed Chair Jerome Powell from office to get policy more aligned with the administration's goals. So let's start off with our lawyer, since we have one on the panel, and say, Mauricio, is this even legal that he could do this?
Whew, I just got a drink of my little pisco and ginger ale. That really stung. So let me regroup here. But there's apparently this 10-page memo that's been drafted by some of Trump's quote unquote allies, whatever that means. But it's a pretty aggressive document that appears to show several ways, and we'll go through those in a second, but several ways that Trump might be able to insert himself into the process of the Fed, meaning having some influence on interest rate policy, maybe even sitting on the Fed board and really inserting himself into the process. And I hope I don't offend anyone, but I figured I'd do a really, really quick civics lesson before we get into the meat and potatoes, since I am the attorney. But we have three branches of government, right, guys? We have the legislative branch, which is the branch that actually creates the laws, and that's Congress. We have the executive branch, which executes on those laws, which is the White House and the government as we know it. And then we have the legislative branch, which is actually obviously interprets the laws and makes sure it doesn't violate the Constitution.
I think you meant the judicial in that last
the
one.
Judicial branch. My apologies. Thank you for that, Jay. Now, the Federal Reserve is a creature of the legislature. It comes from the Federal Reserve Act. So this is something that came from Congress. So if you were going to try to change the laws of the Fed, it has to come through Congress. It's not something the president can just start, making up these new rules and saying, hey, I want a seat at the board. I want to have a say on interest rates. I want this, I want that. Now, to be fair, the president does influence the Fed indirectly because per the Federal Reserve Act, the president is actually the one that elects or nominates, nominates the Federal Reserve, the Board of Governors, but also the Federal Reserve chair. But then it's up to the Senate to confirm. It's very similar to the Supreme Court justice process. And so they do influence, obviously, the president's obviously going to pick a Fed chair that aligns if they have the opportunity to elect somebody that aligns with their political or what their agenda. But once they get elected, they're supposed to be autonomous. They're supposed to be separate. The way the Federal Reserve Act is really drafted is to make it sure it's an independent, not an independent branch, but almost like an independent body so that it's not influenced by this. So the fact that Trump wants to do all these things is interesting, but without the support of the Senate, which we'll get to in a second, from a legal perspective, I'm not sure how far he's going to get. But it's interesting because some of these are kind of, I don't know if they're funny or not, but I thought it'd be interesting thought experiment to go through some of these and see what we thought, if he was successful, how that would, affect the economy. So one of the things he wants is he wants basically to be the president be consulted and play a role in setting interest rates. That was really the big thing. I mean, obviously, Donald Trump is a real estate guy. He likes low interest rates for a variety of different reasons, least of which is because of real estate. But he wants to have a sort of a say in that. He wants the Fed chairman to consult with the president and maybe even go further, where he may actually have a seat in the board. That was also apparently, allegedly, I actually searched the web. I haven't seen the actual, I don't know if it's circulating or not. I don't know if you guys saw it or not, but there's this 10-page memo that was definitely not cited, or was cited but not shown in the Wall Street Journal article. But maybe even having a seat.
Let's be clear real quick. He wanted low interest rates when he was president. He's now complaining about the Fed potentially lowering interest rates this year ahead of the election. So you could argue that potentially he doesn't really care about low interest rates. He just cares about low interest rates when it's going to help him.
And can Trump fire Powell? Because I remember back when Trump was president in 2019, if you remember, Powell was raising interest rates, right? And Trump
hired him. I think we need to remind everybody of that.
For sure. Yeah. Trump hired him, but Trump was not happy when Powell was raising those interest rates, and he was calling him names like bonehead and stuff like that. And like, he was saying like, oh, I'm going to fire you. Like, can he actually fire him? Can he take office and fire Powell?
Let's be clear on that, because Trump did not hire Powell. He nominated Powell as the Fed board, and the Senate approved, which is an important point because there is some checks and balances there. Yes, that was a discussion, again, according to the Wall Street Journal. I obviously don't know Trump personally. I don't know the inner workings of the White House, but apparently, according to the reports, Trump had that discussion and would have liked to have removed Powell while he was in there, even though he nominated him and he started, I think it was 2022 is when he came on. He wanted to remove him, and his advisors were telling him that really was on dubious grounds to be able to nominate, especially if you don't agree. If you just want to disagree with their policy positions, which is really what it is, that's, from what everything I've read, is not something that's going to be working under the Federal Reserve Act. I think it's going to be something more like when a Supreme Court justice, I mean, they have a lifetime tenure. You literally have to be doing some corrupt, it'd have to be something much more serious than simply, oh, I don't agree with the direction of their policy. Because that's what he wants to get to. He actually wants, again, I shouldn't say he wants, this 10-page document that's out there, which, by the way, again, the Wall Street Journal calls it allies, but, AJ's an ally. Does that mean that he, does that mean that if he writes a paper that somehow it gets connected to Trump? But so these folks are writing this stuff, and they're alleging or proposing that anytime the Fed comes out with a regulation, maybe this this facility that was helping out the banks, if they want to bail out people, that has to be first run through and regulated through a branch of the executive branch, like the Treasury Department. They want the Treasury Department to almost act like checks and balances, quote unquote checks and balances, on any decision of the Fed, which obviously would blow the independence. And the insinuation of that memo was that, hey, prior to be nominated for the Fed chairman, there has to be sort of an agreement that, hey, you're going to check in and consult with the president before you make any of these decisions, and really have the president consult and negotiate and try and literally influence interest rates and everything like that. So again, we don't know if this memo even exists. I'm sure it does to some extent. I don't know who's writing these memos. Are they really allies? Or, I mean, again, there's a difference between an ally and a close advisor. For example, I would make the distinction between an ally and a really close advisor to President Trump. But I wouldn't. I think the interesting thing, we don't know if it was true or not, but one of the interesting things that came out is that the spokesperson for Trump didn't really deny or condone, or the Wall Street Journal article asked them, hey, is this true? Is this true? He basically said, hey, look, if it doesn't come from the official word of us, it's not official. But it's not like they said, hey, this is ridiculous. There's no way Trump would do this. They kind of left it out there, and so people are reading into the fact that they didn't really vehemently deny that. But look, at the end of the day, I think it's very similar. And then I want to get into, maybe ask you guys too, like, what do you guys think if this was something that was able to happen? But again, there was a rumor, the talks not too long ago about the opposite side of the spectrum, the liberal, so the Democrats or the liberals, and they wanted to expand the amount of Supreme Court justice seats on the Supreme Court so they could have some influence over that. So there's always these discussions, however ridiculous you think there are. I just thought it would be a fun thought experiment to say, look, even though I think it's a really long shot, because again, you do need the Senate to be on board with whatever you're saying, and they've already talked to a bunch of Republican senators, and they're not on board. It's not like they're like, yeah, this sounds like a great idea. Everybody's saying this is a terrible idea, but let's just have that thought experiment. Like, what happens if? Why wouldn't we have a situation where the president can influence Fed policy, and if they think, hey, look, the economy is going to be doing much better if we just reduced interest rates, so have the president who represents the people, why not have the president have an influence on that decision? What's so bad about that?
I think first of all, the bad thing is politicians will do whatever's good for politicians. The Democrats want to expand the Supreme Court because it's good for them at that time. They don't want to do it when it's not. Trump wants interest rates to go down when it's good for him. He doesn't want them to go down when it's not good for him. So he would remove the Fed chairman and put someone in that he wanted to do something that he wanted in the short term. And that's why the checks and balances are really important, because politicians are short-term things, people, right? I mean, this whole thing, even with Trump or Biden or whatever, honestly won't matter in 20 years. So when we look at it, the things that they do that would impact the structure that would matter in 20 years, that's where I start to get really nervous. So if there's anything that they want to fundamentally change that would then in turn have long-term effects on how the structure of checks and balances work, right? I have issues with that, because what happens is it's the same thing that I had with Obama. Obama had a lot of consolidation of power, right? We consolidated a lot and gave him a lot of power during that time. And then when Trump came in and started issuing executive orders and started to use all these powers that Obama used, people lost their minds and they didn't think he should have those powers. And I'm like, yeah, but you gave them to Obama. And that's the problem. We can't pick and choose who we like to use the powers that we give them and then not allow it to give it to somebody we don't like. I would prefer to not give them those things at all, either one, because I know who's going to use it. So there's these checks and balances are super important. It's even when we're talking about central banks, it's even more important. People will argue that the central bank is not an independent actual thing, that it is a political entity driven. You hear the arguments nonstop all the time. There is an aspect of this that is true. I completely agree and believe it, because I don't think anything is truly independent. You know what I mean? That's not, but there are checks and balances, and they don't think in 4-year terms because they deal with the consequences outside 4 years. So at the end of the day, the incentives for them are not aligned with the incentives, right, of the political structure. Central banks need to think like that. They cannot think in 4-year increments. That would be devastating to our economy. And it would be driven by things that didn't have to do with monetary policy. Now, whether you think the central bank is trying to help a candidate or hurt a candidate based upon when they do certain things, I guess that's arguable. If they do have some bias in the decisions that they were making at that time, there are checks and balances within central banks to make certain decisions that they try to get away with.
Well, and the Fed chair isn't technically like a politician, but at the same time, they still do have terms, just like politicians do, and they still do need to be, I don't know if you call it elected or like what the term
Appointed.
was, but appointed, right, or recommended to be appointed every single time, and it's always in the middle of someone's term, right? So the next time that his term comes up in 2026, so you're going to want to be reappointed in the middle of your term. So you're going to want to do kind of what the current incumbent wants you to do. So I mean, like to think that like the Fed chair is going to act completely independently politically is a little bit naive. Not to mention, like we even saw it. Like Trump, kind of stomped his hand against the table for a little bit, and Powell, pushed back a little bit, but then eventually he did give in. He did start reducing interest rates there. It wasn't a very long kind of little rebellion he had against Trump last time. So I think eventually, if Trump does win, even though that Powell has another 2 years, I feel like he is going to be listening a little bit to what he's saying.
I agree with all of you, but I'm going to take it one step further. Let me start with where I agree. I don't think it's good to give any president, Trump or Biden or anybody, the power to influence central bank decisions, because they are going to use it for short term gain. If Biden had that power right now, there's very little doubt in my mind that we'd see lower interest rates leading up to the election. And I think we can all agree that right now, lower interest rates could be very troublesome for the economy. We saw that with Trump in 2018 when Powell was hiking rates and Trump wanted him to lower rates. And I think it was clear to everybody that after a decade of exceptionally low rates, we needed to get rates up because we needed room to be able to lower them when something bad happened, which happened in 2020. Luckily, we had a little bit of runway. Trump wouldn't have allowed that. And so I think, number one, you need to remove the ability, because there's an incentive there. And there's been plenty of studies done in Latin America that have shown that the more independent a Federal Reserve is, the better handle those countries have on inflation. So when Federal Reserves are not independent of the leaders of the countries, those countries tend to have higher inflation. And I don't think that's just coincidence. So number one, I don't trust any politician not to use that power in a way that's going to help them and potentially hurt our economy long term. But number two, and this is where I'm going to go a step further, I don't think most of our elected officials are smart enough to know how to wield this power. And I'm not, this isn't Trump specific at all, but I will use Trump as an example. Back when he was first elected and came into office, there were stories and they were pretty much, nobody denied it, that he was calling up the Fed chair and asking them, do we want a strong dollar? Is a strong dollar good for our country or not? And it's let's be honest, it's a difficult question. And if somebody that's not an economist should be asking those questions. There's nothing wrong with the president asking those questions. That's not a weakness of him asking that question, but it's indicative of the fact that he didn't spend 4 or 8 years studying economics and his entire career studying the history of economics. And certainly, I from what I've seen of Biden, again, like I have no reason to believe that he's any smarter about economics, nor Obama, nor Bush. Maybe Clinton. Clinton had an economics background, but the vast majority of presidents don't have much of an economics background. And I don't believe they're smart enough to understand the trade-offs, even if they were independent, even if they weren't going to use it for their own personal gain. I don't think most of them are smart enough. Let me throw one more thing out while I'm on the topic. We talk about like what's the risk of a president having too much power over things like interest rates. Go back to the 70s, and the Fed chair, a guy named Arthur Burns, was the Fed chair under Nixon and Ford and Carter. And you remember what happened in the 70s? We saw tremendous inflation and we saw really high interest rates to fight that. A lot of the, and I don't know if this is true, but the talk is that the presidents at the time had a lot more influence over the Fed than they do now. And there's a lot of reason to believe that Arthur Burns was making decisions back in the 70s based on input he was getting from the executive branch. Volcker stepped in the early 80s and basically said, I'm taking the Fed independent and I'm making decisions here and I'm going to do what's in the best interest of the country. I don't care about what Reagan has to say about it. And ultimately that solved the inflation crisis.
Love Volcker.
Yeah, Volcker saved this country. And a lot of people credit him with being the guy that kind of made the Fed an independent organization to the extent it is today.
Yeah, and Jay, just interesting. Even if the president was a good economist, like you mentioned Clinton or something, the problem is good economics makes bad politics, right? And good politics makes bad economics, and that's the problem. Even if you know what the right answer is economically, like to your point, Jay, you were saying, hey, good economics may be lower interest rates. I'm sorry, not having lower interest rates because that's going to cause a problem. But from a politics standpoint, politicians want to lower interest rate, get this inflate. It just doesn't make any sense from a political standpoint. So I think good economics and politics just don't necessarily match. And to your point about you mentioned something about you were talking about the length of the Fed's tenure and how they're a lot longer term than the short term of the president. These Fed governors are 14-year terms. They're not 4-year terms. The governors are there for 14 years. Now the Fed chair gets a 4-year term. So, like to your point, Kyle, they're up. Powell specifically is up for renomination or reconfirmation in 2026. So that is going to happen during the second thing. But the whole point is, remember, it's not just the Fed chairman, right? You have 7 Fed governors, and you have, I believe, 12 regional presidents, and interest rates are done by the Open Market Committee, which they basically have all of the governors. You have 7 governors that are there for 14-year tenures, and then the presidents kind of rotate every 4 years, or where they just kind of rotate. Every year they rotate 4 of them. And so it's a committee, right? It is literally an open market committee that determines interest rates. So yes, the governor, obviously Powell, has a tremendous amount of influence, just like if you have a board of directors and you're the chairman of the board, you have a lot more influence than the regular board members. But it's not just Powell. You do have 7 other governors that have been nominated by the president, confirmed by the Senate, and they have 14-year terms. So they ain't going anywhere for the next several years.
And you said something interesting there at the beginning of that, which was that the central bank and the president often have conflicting goals. And that's pretty obvious when you look at the fact that it's the legislative and the executive branch that controls fiscal policy. Fiscal policy meaning taxes and revenues and expenses and budgets and things like that. And the Federal Reserve controls monetary policy. And very often those two are at odds. So the government is trying to spend a lot of money to stimulate the economy and to keep people employed and to create lots of government jobs and to create lots of tax revenue, and they want to tax and spend. And the Fed's job is just the opposite. The Fed's job is conservatism and making sure that the long-term outlook for the economy is strong, even at the risk of short-term issues. And so giving the power for both fiscal and monetary policy to the same branch or the same person is a recipe for disaster.
It's funny. I often tell people, I'm like, the reason the success of America is that America's dysfunctional. And I mean that. So the government was literally set up to create dysfunction. It's very difficult for us to get things done. And it is actually set up to fight. So a lot of, checks and balances, when we say checks and balances, are really to stall things. And we do this in America, and it's part of American culture. We fight. We argue over everything, over the stupidest crap. And we will fight to the death. Free speech, right? We can say anything about anyone at any time, and we should be able to. And that is kind of the backbone of it. And if we get away from this dysfunction, what happens is you have consolidation, and you consolidate to one side, and then you consolidate to another side, and you get huge whipsaws. And
or
then
even if we have temporary consolidation, that's when you have all that crazy spending because of COVID, right? When everyone agrees.
Exactly. And that's not good. When they all come together to agree, we go to war. Like, literally, that's usually what happens. When we all come together and agree, we go and invade a country. Or what do? We make people not work. We take all our personal rights and freedoms, and we just pour trillions of dollars into the economy. It actually tends to be bad when America agrees on everything, because the checks and balances go out the window, and we're not meant to do that here. And the world doesn't want us to. The world wants us to fight and argue, to stall, so we're not making huge decisions. And the carving out of the Fed is meant to be a whole nother layer, where that even if we did agree to do crazy things, the Fed theoretically should say no, or could be able to say no. And so it's this layering on that is really, really important. And that stops Biden from doing insane, crazy things, and Trump from doing insane, crazy things. because either one of them would and will if they can. And they do that because that's their job. It's to serve the people and the will of their people, but they serve their people, not the other party's people. So what happens is they will do whatever they want, whether the other half agrees to it or not, because that's who they're serving. And so it's very important that we take away their power to do so, that they can get certain things done, but they literally are forced to work with the other side. Because if they are not, they won't. And that's why any consolidation, monetary or otherwise, of that power is extraordinarily scary.
Before we move on here, I do want to go through the potential, though, if Trump does get elected and if Trump does assert some influence on the Fed. And because if we look back to his previous term, he was not trying to hide the fact that he was more interested in lower interest rates. He even at one point said he wanted negative interest rates because he thought that would be a good solution for the government to solve Social Security, refinance its debt to longer term, which actually isn't that bad of an idea. But either way, he believes that lower interest rates are good for the economy. So is this something that, if it seems like Trump is going to be elected, we should be preparing for, or as real estate investors, we should be actually considering that when we're looking at who's going to be next as potential candidates for office?
I think, first of all, the depends more on what happens with the Senate. So I think that at the end of the day, Trump would try to get rid of him. So if he didn't lower interest rates, Trump wants lower interest rates because he wants the economy to boom, and regardless of long-term effects. And once again, that's the same with any president. That's not exclusive to him. And so don't be like, oh yeah, it's Trump, or right? No, they would all do it. Now, with that said, the Senate is going to play ball or they're not. And so I think that if you have a Senate that falls to Trump, then you're going to have he's going to get a lot more done, right, on that aspect. I think that if you don't, though, they won't. Because if Democrats control the Senate, they're not going to want Trump to get anything. It doesn't matter. It doesn't, even if it's good for the economy, they won't want him to get it because they don't want him to get a win. So I think the Senate is actually way more important in this aspect. If Trump gets elected, or if he gets elected, it's what happens there. That will be the determining factor.
Specifically on this issue of the Fed, for example, I'm already seeing it, right? Like as soon as let's assume President Trump gets reelected, if that's the right word, reelected, he nominates some new, because he's going to get, even if he can't fire Powell, he's going to have a chance to nominate a new Fed chairman in 2026, right? So then he nominates whoever he's going to nominate, and now he's in front of the Senate, right? Both Democrats and Republicans. What do you think the first question is going to be? Hey, have you had any discussions with President Trump about consulting with him about interest rates? And did you agree that in order for you to get the nomination, like all those questions are going to happen, right? And so I think that's going to be an interesting thing. But the Senate, for sure, is important, but because obviously they need the confirmation of the Senate as well. But again, it'll be interesting to see. You've got to have really, I don't know. I think it'll be a tough sell to get a majority of the Senate to agree on any changes anyway. But anyway.
I'm not a legal scholar, but I've been reading a couple things that have implied that it may be within his power to demote the chairman, in this case, Jay Powell, to a Fed committee member and promote somebody else who's already on the board into that chair position. I don't know if that's true or not, but I have read a couple people suggest that might be perfectly legal and within the president's power. So it would be interesting if that's the case, if there's somebody else on the committee that would be more favorable for Trump. Now, again, Trump nominated Powell to begin with. So, I mean, the question is was that a strategic decision or not? And what makes us think that there's going to be a better strategic situation for him amongst the current committee members? But that might be an option as well.
Well, I also read that he could fire a board of governors member if if they have some sort of cause, but it has to be like a real good cause. Apparently, they quoted inefficiency, neglect of duty, or malfeasance in office is kind of like the only things. So I don't know if you could stretch that or if you could, figure out a way. But technically, I guess there is some precedent for him to be able to do it.
Yeah, but even the article even state again. The article states that was an argument that was thrown around the last time, and his advisors, close advisors, didn't think he had the legal standing to do that. So if he didn't do it last time, I think that's a long shot. But he does get the chance. So again, Powell's term does expire in 2026. So a year and a half into Trump's presidency, he will have the chance to not re-up him and can pick anybody else from the other seven board of governors.
All right, boys, then commercial real estate investors survive to 26 then, and then we'll see those interest rates.
It survived to 35. I mean, you heard this? Survived to 35. Have you ever heard that one?
That's too long.
Well, but if we go back based on the track record between Powell and Trump, that if Trump just bangs his fist on the table for long enough, that eventually Powell will yield and lower the rates. So I guess worst case scenario, we shouldn't have to wait the full 2 years. Any final thoughts, or we move on to the double Trump, double trouble. All right, so let's move on to our second article from the Wall Street Journal titled "The Office Market Meltdown Comes for Trump's Prized Wall Street Building." And so this is, of course, referring to the office building in New York City at 40 Wall Street. The article is a mixture of facts and speculation. So AJ, why don't you break down what we actually know about what's going on with Trump's building in New York City?
So we all know about the problems in office. New York is no exception from this, which fundamentally, this is what's going on. Just to recap in the office world and space, we have vacancies that are rising. We had extreme all-time high in values and everything when money was cheap. COVID came, decimated office space. We now have about 21 or 22% vacancy rate for New York City. Their downtown vacancy rate is at 22%. And we have interest rates that don't make that the vast majority of these loans that were done are not feasible at these interest rates. So really what we're looking at here when you go to Trump's tower is he has a $125 million mortgage that matures in July. Now, he's currently at 3.7. He has a vacancy rate that matches downtown New York at a roughly around 21%. Now, they have a few major tenants that are gone, including their largest tenant, which was a drugstore chain. And so they've got same problems that everybody else is facing. Now, it's interesting because he paid less than $5 million for this in 1995, which is wild. I mean, that's wild. So to think about. But obviously, he took money out and borrowed against it, hence the $120.5 million mortgage that's up for refinance. So really, this is the underlying driving issue, right? We have his disposition that Trump has maintained would be worth over $530 million. So that's what he states that it's worth. But what it's worth, if you're trying to refinance, that doesn't really matter. It's really going to be predicated on whether it can pay the debt or not, what the debt coverage ratio is. So the question is, his is kind of a example of the greater office problems that we're seeing. You have high vacancy rates that doesn't look like it's changing anytime soon. You have high debt, low interest rates that now have to roll into high interest rates. And that spread is large. And that means that a lot of these buildings are underwater. So the question is, can he actually roll his mortgage over, and will it work? Can he pay it, or does he have to bring money? Is the debt coverage ratio not going to work? Is it too much debt? Is he going to have to bring
Well,
money?
why don't we just dive into this? We could do some back of the napkin calculations on this, and I will. How about I'll pull up share my screen here, and I'll pull up a mortgage calculator, and we'll just kind of go through and we will guess at this. So just based off of this article, we know he's currently paying 3.7%. We're going to assume it's a 30-year amortization, and we know that the loan's about 120 million. So that means his loan payment yearly is about 6.6 million. They said that the rental income was about 12.8 million. So if he's making 12.8 million, he's only paying 6.6. That's a pretty good little cash flowing machine he's got.
If that doesn't include expenses.
Well, so like let's just for the argument's sake, let's assume they're all triple net, expenses are minimum, just so we can kind of do it. And if you go down here, so if we talk about the DSCR is a 1.93, which is excellent. That's a great DSCR. I wish we had 1.93 across all of our properties. Now, let's start to factor in some of the things that they said have changed since the last time we looked at it. First of all, when they're refining, we're going to have to look at a 7% interest, right? Term stays the same. Let's just see if we can make this work if he can refi into the current amount. Well, now just by changing that 7% loan amount, that puts his loan payment up to 9.5 million a year. They also said before it was 90%, about 90% occupancy. Now we're at about 80% occupancy. So if you take this number and you divide it by 0.9, you get a gross of about 14.2. You factor in 80% occupancy, that's about 11.4 instead of 12.8. Also in the article, it said that asking rents have gone down by about 13.3%. Now, the problem with these big commercial properties is leases don't turn over very often, so we can't really say like all of the rents went down by 13.4%. But let's just say instead of 11.4 million, let's just call it an even 11 million for the gross. Once again, we'll assume triple net. Expenses are minimal. Well, now when we go down here, we look at our DSCR, and our DSCR is now, just with those changes, is now 1.14. You can't get a loan at 1.14. So that means we're going to have to go back up to these proceeds, and we're going to have to say, okay, what about 110 million? Well, 110 million gets them at a 1.25. You can maybe get a 1.25 on multifamily, but I don't think office. I think office is quite a bit higher than that. So like, let's go down to let's see what 90. Sorry, I put an extra zero in there. So that 90 gets us to about 1.53. That seems reasonable for an office building. But that means that in this scenario, with putting in those assumptions, Trump's going to have to come up with $30 million just to refi this property. He might be able to do it. I don't know. He's got a lot of other things going on in his life. Whether he can, but I'm sure he has a lot of investors to come up with a 30 million. But from the sounds of it, the value of this property might kind of be right around the $120 million range anyway. So like, is he going to want to come up with an extra $30 million for this property when it's only worth 120 million, I guess is the question.
Now, I want to give a caveat to this. These things, when you're in the hundreds of millions of dollars, don't operate like normal loans. So when you look at these kind of structured in debts, and if you guys have studied at all any of his past deals and working with the bank and seeing kind of what he's done for, he had the famous quote that he's like, I can't even remember exactly how it goes, but something to the effect that when you take out $1 billion, you own the bank. Like you control it.
I think the quote was, when you take out $1 million loan, it's your problem. When you take out $1 billion, it's the bank's problem.
Yes.
That's I've heard that all the time. If you owe the bank $1 million, you've got a problem. If you owe the bank $100 million, the bank has a problem.
The bank has a problem. And so what happens with these is the bank negotiates in ways that they don't with us and do things. So I do want to have a caveat that there's things that we don't know in here, things like that. But also, it's fairly shocking to me when you have these big loans, what banks will actually do and what they can get away with. So whereas I would be told, you're either coming up with the money, right, or you're gone, we're taking your property, whatnot. That does not necessarily translate to these situations. These are not recourse loans. You're right. These are non-recourse loans that the banks do not want. The banks do not want to take these loans. They don't want these office buildings. They do not want to get in fights. And so, it'll be interesting to see if this is even becomes a thing, where it wouldn't surprise me if it never does.
I mean, I think for Trump, like there's plenty of reason to believe that banks will make concessions, and I'm not saying they shouldn't. They have long-standing relationships with him, and so I think he's in a much different situation than most commercial investors right now. But I think the exercise that Kyle just took us through is a good indication of if this property were owned by anybody other than Trump, to think that the typical investor could just bring $30 million to the table. And that assumes that a bank would be willing to lend even in the situation where they bring $30 million to the table. Keep in mind, typical LTV on an office loan these days is 43%, and banks are very hesitant to lend on these properties, even with significant equity, because we're seeing deals that are trading at 5% of what they traded at a couple years ago, or 10% of what they traded at a couple years ago. And so there are a lot of banks that aren't even willing to lend. So regardless of whether Trump is able to get this done or not, I think the point still stands that most typical investors out there that are dealing with properties like this, frankly, are screwed.
Yeah, it shows what's going on. And it shows, everybody's seeing it because it's Trump. But this is happening across the board. And two, this particular project is a good one. That's one of the things we have to understand here is we're using a test subject of a great property, right? This isn't a bad property. This isn't a property.
This is like almost across the street from literally where the stock market is, the stock exchange.
This is like prime in the world. So if you take this across everything else, it just kind of think about what that relays. It is a good litmus test for the larger problems that office have, even when you're facing these things in a location like that. When you have a location like this in New York City overall, because it's not because it's Trump Tower or anything else like that. I saw somebody in the comments was like, that's just because people don't want to rent from Trump. It's the exact same vacancy rate across New York. That's not how people think. It matches identical. It's exactly the same vacancy rate.
There's probably just as many people who will want to rent because it's Trump.
Exactly. So it has nothing to do with that. This is a litmus test for a wider issue across a sector.
Just a quick comment on the whole thing is this, unlike other projects that Trump has, I know that 40 Wall Street is special to him because it's just really where he made his name for himself. Everybody kind of makes, not everybody, but a lot of people think, oh, Trump's just, the son of a really successful multimillionaire, Fred Trump, and he really is just a trust fund baby. But he really did use this building to show his chops and pull this off. And I have spoken, I don't know too many people, but I do know George, I don't say I know him, but I've spoken with him several times. This is his attorney in New York, George Ross, and he's the one that actually negotiated this deal. And I know this is a very, very special thing for him. So I don't think he's going to treat this like any other building where, I'll just bankrupt this thing, or I'll just use the bank, because he loves to use bankruptcy laws to protect himself. But I think on this one, he does have an affinity for the property. So he's going to do everything in his power to make this thing work. And to your point, AJ, it's such a huge amount of a loan, and he has that influence with not only with the banks, but let's be honest. How hard do you think it is for him to go raise even if it's a terrible project, how hard do you think it is for him to go raise 30, 40, 50 million dollars from people that, that for the next president of the United States? Like, it's not that hard.
Well, and if you look at these numbers too, like it's not that hard to get the total loan amount to back to 120 million and just let him kind of keep his loan. Like you bring down the percentage a little bit. Instead of 7%, you give him, a teaser rate of 6%. You bring the DSCR down a little bit of what's typically required. You just pull on the levers a little bit, and you can get him to that, and just maybe say, hey, you got to put up a bunch more reserves. I'm seeing that a lot where people are saying, hey, we'll refi you, give you some more preferable terms. You got to put a bunch of things in reserve. And I could see like a deal like that happening.
When they're extending, they're giving concessions. Banks don't want these properties. They don't want them. And they remember too, all the problems that happen and the messes that they were in for a decade after taking on all the properties, trying to clear them out. They didn't win in that. That wasn't a good scenario. They were selling 6 years later, properties they'd taken over, which just devalued why they held them. And they just went and they were just literally just ditching them at pennies on the dollar. They couldn't even sell them, even though on the market they trade for more. They just didn't have the means and ability to. So, but once again, though, this is a star property. This is a property investors want. This is a property banks actually want. So, I think that this property showing that there are troubles is a good example that there's a lot of properties out there that they don't have options. They're really going to be struggling. And there's no really good scenario when interest rates aren't coming down. In fact, they may go up a little. So with that, that's really shaking up the industry.
I was going to say real quick, and then I'll let you, Jay. What's crazy about New York, and this is not something that any of us, or especially you guys, have to deal with, but like this particular property, I know Trump does not even own the land that it sits on. Like in New York, it's very common to have these ground leases, and so this is another example of this property. He owns the property, but he doesn't own the land underneath the property. He owns a ground lease. But it's always been fascinating to me because that's not something that's very common around the rest of the world, the rest of the country, where you don't actually own the land, but you have to lease it for 99 years, then you renew it every 99 years. But in New York, it's even crazier. You have to actually people buy and sell the airspace above the property, which is also kind of an interesting little tidbit. But anyway, Jay, I interrupted you. Apologize.
No. I grew up in Baltimore, which is another place where ground leases are pretty common. So I'm familiar with them, but yeah, most people aren't familiar. But just another, just to go off on a tangent, but I think this is a really good example of this. I know a lot of people right now are thinking office is a terrible place to be, and they're terrified of office, and they think office is never going to come back. Keep in mind, Trump bought this property in 1995 for $5 million.
Under five. And so for anybody that wasn't paying attention back in 1995, and I certainly wasn't, but I've read about it. We were in the middle of basically a commercial real estate crash in 1995. And so I'm sure people were thinking the exact same thing about office back then as they're thinking today. But Trump said, hey, I want this property. I'm going to take a shot on this property. And this property has now gone up probably 40 times or more over the last 30 years. So for anybody out there that thinks office is dead and they're terrified to even think about buying commercial real estate like that, who knows what the next 10 or 20 or 30 years might bring.
Now let's not get too carried away though. He bought it for under $5, but he also put in $100 million in renovations. So let's keep that in mind. His basis is pretty high as well, right?
True.
But the point being is that, I agree with Jay. Interest rates are causing more problems than the fundamentals of the properties are. So meaning, once again, he's not underwater in cash flow. That's not this property cash flows. It makes money, right? Obviously at such high interest rates and changes the DCR, but fundamentally the location, everything else. And we're seeing that a lot. Good properties that have good fundamentals, that make great income, that took out debt at astronomically low historic interest rates. They were leveraged up because they could. and they could get really low interest rates. So it made sense then. They could pay it. And it wasn't even a big deal. Well, then they never expected interest rates to go to 7%. And when it does, that makes what was really easy and a good deal not today. But the properties, lots of times, aren't necessarily performing horribly. We're still talking about occupancies at 80% in one of the worst office markets we've ever seen. So, lots of these things are cyclical, and markets in office aren't completely dead. They're not going away. People said retail was dead. Retail's not dead. Was it overbuilt through the 90s? And did they overbuild one particular product, which were big box stores of 200,000 square feet, which that model doesn't work? Yeah, retail shifted. It's not dead. Retail's everywhere. People still go and use retail, and they're full and they make money, right? And I think that we have this problem with office right now too, is office was overbuilt and it was over leveraged. Our utilization of it has changed, but it's not going away. We will still have office buildings, right? But we may need supply to shrink a little, right? We may need the way we use it to change, and poor properties that weren't good locations, but were performing and taking out a lot of debt because of high markets, they probably need to go away. And they're probably not going to perform at a level that they saw when it was in bubble territory. But outside that, a lot of people, like Jay's saying here, is going to make a ton of money buying up properties that are what we will look back and say pennies on the dollar today.
Call the herd, baby. Before we wrap this up, I just want to bring up two aspects of this. First of all, it does matter, but I don't think we have time to get into this. This property was actually put into special servicing the end of last year. I think that would be a good topic for us to talk about what exactly special servicing is at some point. But that's one of those provisions that a lender steps in and is able to kind of control cash flows a little bit. The other point is just this concept of cash out refis. When you look at this and you talk about locking in low interest rates, well, not only did he lock in a low interest rate, you said he bought it for $5 million. He also cash out refied with a loan of $120 million. So he probably took out a lot of cash out at that point and took a lot of his chips off the table, as you might say. So that puts him in a situation where, okay, if there is a huge downturn like this, and he has to even throw the keys back, like he's not leaving with nothing, right? He already took a bunch of cash out off the table when he did that cash out refi. So, right. So, so that's just another consideration about cash out refis in this situation.
Yeah, I know the whole point, and I know this was more of an exercise as an extrapolation to what office is doing in general. But the other interesting part about this specific building is, remember, I think we talked about in a prior episode that Trump was found liable for civil fraud, and so the Attorney General has been threatening to take over this property. I think earlier this year, she's like, "I'm prepared to take over this." So I wonder how that affects. I don't think it affects the occupancy rate, right? Because like to AJ's point, this is the occupancy rates are consistent across the board in New York. But I just wonder if that is a piece of the puzzle for the banks, and whether if the Attorney General does go through with that and tries to take that over as part of the civil fraud judgment, if that has any impact on this particular.
Yeah, I wonder if the banks would fight that, right? Like that. I guess based on the legal docs that you make with these loans, like you can't do that, but I guess it's the government, so maybe they have a way around it. I don't know.
Well, it's no different. I think that if you have a judgment against you, right? If I've got $100 billion judgment against you, and I'm going to execute on that judgment, and I ask the judge to turn over your property to satisfy your judgment, I think that's the same thing. It's just that the government ends up with the property, and of course, it
would depend on the state, right? Like the state, what recourse they have in what state. And New York's not the best, so they might be able to do it. But if you try to pull that off in Nevada or Wyoming or something, all you could get really is a charging order. But once again, it's the government. Like I'm sure they have other means other than us.
Sue the bank.
Yeah, true. All right, should we do a top 10, Mauricio?
Hold on.
Oh, Mauricio's crooked hat for me.
Just on your behalf, hey, Kyle, what do you think?
Looking good.
That ginger piss must be doing it for you. All right. So in line of what we were just talking about, with $120 million loan on a property in New York City, got me wondering, what are the most expensive buildings in New York City? How much is real estate, these buildings, really worth?
Doesn't AJ have a penthouse in Manhattan? What is that going for, AJ?
A few.
A few, yeah.
Yeah.
So I couldn't pull a top 10, but I did find the exact numbers. That I did find the top 7. Now a lot of these they're not completely up to date with, you can't really find like 2024 appraisals, but I could tell you what they were built for and how much it cost to build them, and you can kind of extrapolate that.
Is this the world or the country?
New York.
New York, right? Like
New York City.
I'm going to guess all of them surround Central Park. All of them are penthouses in Central Park.
So the number one most expensive building, I don't know if anyone can guess
I can
this,
guess.
in New York City. What is it?
World Trade Center.
That's what I think too.
Yes. One World Trade Center. It was completed in 2014. The total cost came to $4 billion.
Oh, I thought we were talking about like individual apartments or something. I thought that we were talking about the whole building.
No. This is entire buildings. No, this is buildings, just like Trump's building. That's kind of what I was getting at.
So Kyle, I got a story for this. So I'm in, I got to tell you the story. I'm in Dubai, and I'm in the Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the world. And I'm sitting there talking to a bunch of the real estate guys and a bunch of guys in there that worked on it. We're in this, like, they have like this private place, and we have like this dinner stuff and so really nice, really fancy. And so they look over at me and they're like, hey, I want you to guess, which I'm the only American that I saw the whole time I was in Dubai for a week. The only American I saw. Totally out of the subject. Interesting. So they said, I want you to guess how much we built this for. And so I was looking at it, and I'm like, let's say at the time, 253. And they were like, 1. And I was like, you built this thing for $1 billion? And they were like, yeah, we have cheap labor. And they all started laughing.
Indentured servants.
I was like, my jaw hit the floor. They laughed out loud. So for any of you that don't know, it's basically slavery.
Yeah, indentured servants. That's the correct term these days.
Wild too, though, that first of all, they built it for $1 billion, but how funny they all thought it was and said, yeah, it cost you guys a lot more to pay people in America.
So basically what they do is they pay people to come into the country, they fly them in, and they basically say, okay, now you need to work off that debt that we paid you to bring you to the country.
They did the same thing for the Olympics, right? That's why they got the Olympics done so quickly.
And housing, everything else like that, they provide air quotations, but they have to pay it off. And it's a racket. It's really bad.
Well, in America, it costs $4 billion to build the one World Trade Center. Number 2, Goldman Sachs.
Oh, I'm just not going to guess that. Never mind.
Oh. Number 2, Goldman Sachs headquarters, completed in 2010. The cost was $2.1 billion. Number 3, Bank of America Tower, built in 2009 for $1 billion. Number 4, New York Times Tower, built in 2007. Cost was $850 million. Number 5, the 7 World Trade Center, kind of the same thing, built in the wake of the World Trade Centers. That was completed in 2006 for about $700 million. Number 6, 12 Metro Tech Center. Structure was completed in 2005. Final price tag was listed at $360 million. And then finally, kind of an outlier down here, number 7, the Federal Office Building, but it was completed way back in 1994 for a cost of $292 million. So I'm guessing that would be probably much higher on the list if we extrapolated from 1994. But what I thought was super interesting looking at this list, other than the One World Trade Center and the number 7 with the Federal Office Building, these things were built in 2010, 2009, 2007, 2006. They were all 2005. They were all kind of built right around that boom and bust era. So it's I guess even in a real estate bust that these things can get completed. All right. Anyone got a game for me? Because I got a dumb one. I didn't have time to get it to really come up with something good.
I got an empty drink.
Me too.
When did this start morphing from a top 10 to a game?
We always did that. We did a top 10 and a game.
Episode 1, Mauricio.
Episode 1?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you ever go into like the spread or like the sheet, the doc that we prepare before every episode, and it goes through the format of our podcast, and there's always top 10 as one of the categories.
There's a sheet.
He's just so drunk by the end he doesn't remember.
Let me remind you, Mauricio. Episode number 1. I'm guessing, but I think this was episode number 1 game. Would you rather live your entire life in Idaho, or was it Idaho or
No, for $1 billion. The question was, if I gave you $1 billion, would you never leave the state of Idaho?
that's what it was?
Absolutely.
Dude, I gotta go watch. That's a great question. Did we really play that game? I'm gonna go watch episode 1. If you haven't watched episode 1, I highly.
Yeah, we went through it. And my answer was I would live in, because like if for $1 billion, like I would just build a dome with my own like
do anything.
interior, like
Why
like a
not?
little Great Wolf Lodge for myself, and just fly in all my friends.
Yeah.
It'd be great.
Oh yeah,
Build an ocean.
that's a great question. I didn't realize you asked that such a brilliant question. Was that episode 1?
I don't know if it was one. It was one of the first 5. We had good questions back then. 47 episodes. It's tough to come up with stuff every week. I've been busy the last 2 days.
Okay, let's go.
All right, let's wrap this up. AJ, you got a plug for us?
Yeah. Plug, check out the podcast. I've got a cool podcast coming up with this Marine, Nick, who's an absolute beast. So yeah, AJ Osborne, go check out the podcast. I've got a really cool one coming out with a very interesting guy.
Mauricio, what do you got for us?
So I've been peppering my YouTube channel with the one and only Jay Scott the last week, because Jay did an amazing episode on Real Estate Syndicated Live, right, Jay, on underwriting, and then I decided to cut like 2 or 3 clips from it. So I'm going to promote the website, not the website, the YouTube channel, Mauricio Raul. And if you want to check out some of Jay's amazing work there, he's probably peppered the entire channel the last week.
Wow, that's like a double plug for Mauricio and Jay. But Jay, I'll still give you a plug.
On Wednesday, the day this comes out. So if anybody that's listening to this early in the morning that happens to be in Florida, I will be speaking at the Sarasota RIA at the Der Dutchman restaurant at noon today being Wednesday. And I'll be talking all about the economy and are we heading for a recession?
What was the name of that restaurant?
Der Dutchman. So we there in part of Sarasota, there's a very large Amish, or actually Mennonite community, and they've got some amazing restaurants, and it's an all-you-can-eat buffet, so you can get tons of amazing food while you listen to me speak. So come for the food, stay for me, maybe.
There better be alcohol too. All right. I am going to, who should I plug? Oh yeah, I'm going to plug my wife. Go check her out. Instagram, Badass Investor, YouTube, Badass Investor. Check out her website, Conference Connect, for checking out, find your next conference, or if you're a speaker looking for conferences to speak at. All right. We all back next week? All of us?
I think so, man. We're on a streak. This is the longest streak we've had, I think, from ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, since like the beginning, maybe.
Yeah. We're going strong.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I don't know about you guys, but my drink is all gone. Time to go hit the head. I will see you next Tuesday.
See you guys.
See ya.
Get that ginger piss in your hole.
You're welcome.